Hello and welcome to my latest art journal page. These are the products I've chosen to work with today. I have no idea where I'm going at this stage, other than I want to use my latest acquisitions of the Tim Holtz new colours, Mermaid, Lagoon and Abandoned Coral. I've chosen some old foam stamps, some Making Memories foam stamps. I'm going to be using the distress paints, the distress sprays, the markers and my Posca pen. Okay, I always start with a blank page in between my previous journal page, and I add some old packaging from either biscuits or, in this case, it is the Milo breakfast cereal. So I do this to protect my pages below, and as you can see there's a lot of overspray. So here I've used my roller towel to spread the colours from one page to the other, and you can see when I used my hand to give extra pressure where I streaked it, you can actually see the lines. Now, I wasn't too impressed with this, but hey, one just carries on. And they do fade pretty much when the drying process is done. I find it's better if you lift the page up when you dry so that the heat can go right through. And in fact, I even turn the pages over to dry, pull the moisture through from the back. You can see where this page is really saturated, the colour has gone through a bit, which is another reason why I leave two blank pages and then glue them together later when I'm done. Okay, now I'm pretty much happy with the way this is dried, and I'm going to start my stamping. I'm using my local brand of gesso, and I'm using my old Tim Holtz packaging from one of his stencils to use as a palette to get my roller nicely evenly covered in gesso. So here you can see I'm covering the stamp, making sure to get it only on the raised bits, not on the black foam, because you don't really need or want it there. I've sprayed my stamp and done a second generation print, and now I'm cleaning my stamp with a baby wipe. On to my next stamp, and this one I'm going to do a few more times, and then I'll do second generation printing with it as well. So here we go, ink up again with more gesso and print. Then I gave it a good old dry. The nice thing about gesso is it acts as a resist underneath distress inks. So here I'm about to use my distress ink pads to darken the edges of my page. I'm using Mermaid Lagoon over the top of where I used the Mermaid Lagoon distress spray. And where you go really nice and dark, the stamping that I've just done really pops out. You can, of course, just give it a gentle wipe with a damp cloth, and where the stamping was done, it will pop out even more. So here I'm going at quadruple speed. Oh, it's such fun to be able to speed this up. Almost done. You can see how dark the colors go when you overlap the two at the bottom of the page. Here we go with Abandoned Coral. I wanted to really make the middle of the page nice and rich. And again, at this stage, I kind of have no idea where I'm going with an actual theme. I really like those swirly stamps that I found, those flourishes, and I wanted to use those, and I wanted to use the geometric prints as well as a contrast, but that's about as far as I'd got with the thought process. So here I am using the black soot distress paint, cleaning it nicely with baby wipe. What you can do is also have a little bowl of water next to you on your table, a shallow lid or ice cream lid with a little bit of water to float your stamps in until you can get them all to the bathroom or the kitchen to give them a good old wash. This is a really big stamp, so it took quite a while to get paint everywhere. Now I'm going to use second generation prints. Third generation prints even. Found one of the smaller stamps and going to print that one twice. also going to use it for some second generation, third generation, fourth generation prints fifth generation prints without repainting. So I think that's enough. Okay, I found this really nice stencil, and I'm now back to using my packaging. And I'm now using the distress paint through the stencil with a piece of foam applicator sponge. The trick to using the foam applicator sponge is that you don't apply as much as if you were to use it directly from the dabber. The distress paint dabber gets really rather wet and it oozes underneath the plastic lines. So here I've picked up a little bit of the gesso that was left on the plastic from stamping earlier, and I'm blending it in around the edges of the stencil to make it a bit lighter. Trying to give the rose a little bit of dimension. Always remember to clean your stencils straight after using them with distress paint or even normal paint, because the paint will dry permanently on there. This is how I store my alphabet stamps. I've decided to say bloom where you're planted, and I store them on a piece of scrapbook paper with double-sided tape on it, and I store them in alphabetical order. Then what I've also done is I have written on the back of my stamps so that I can plan where I need to put what. And you can see I've got a baby wipe ready on the left hand side, just so that I can pop my dirty stamps on the baby wipe, and then I'll take them to the bathroom to be cleaned. I'm using the Abandoned Coral distress paint here. And then I was in two minds as to whether to use the Mermaid Lagoon on Planted, because 90% of the word was going over where I had used the Abandoned Coral, but the last two letters were going to get into the rose, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to handle that. And you can see that it does give me a little bit of a hard time later, because the E and the D disappear somewhat. So now I've decided I'm going to use some stamps that I have purchased second-hand to fill in the words where you are. And I'm using my Ranger Jet Black archival ink. Archival ink's really great because it's so permanent. So you can really do anything you like on top of it and it won't budge. The trick with these stamps is to line them up properly, which isn't easy, but hey, this is an art journal. It's meant to be fun, it's not meant to be stressful. Unless you're like me and you're dyslexic. This time round I managed to get my wording right and my letters the right way up. Every now and again, we land up with backwards letters, upside down letters. But you know what? It's the process that matters. It makes my heart happy. Almost done. Right, now I'm setting about using my distress markers and adding some black, and then I'm going to use my fine tipped water brush pen to blend that out, as well as my grey marker, just to make the letters pop out of the page. This can be quite time consuming. The nice thing is if you get your marker on the paint where you don't want it, you can just take a piece of baby wipe or wet wipe with some water on, like I'm doing now, and just rub it away. So if it goes into the paper, it's a little more difficult to remove, but where you get it on the paint, it comes off really easily. What I've also done is I have scribbled some marker on my craft sheet, and then I just keep dipping my water brush into the marker on the craft sheet, and this just means that it's not as strong as if I had to put the marker directly onto my paper. so I'm using it almost like a watercolor. This takes quite a while. Just make sure when you're doing your shadowing that you always do it on the same side of each letter. That's what makes it really look like it's three-dimensional and pop off the page. So you can see my E is not too bad, but my D is really disappearing into that rose. So I'm going to have to add quite a bit of black soot to make the D really pop out of that rose. Because at the moment it's bloom where you are plant. It's not very good English. But as I said, this really didn't have a direction when I started. It grew, excuse the pun, as I was playing at my desk. And it also, I think, came about when I discovered the rose stencil in my stash. It's not one that I've used often, but it's a really great one. You can see I'm working off my craft sheet again, and I'm trying to really get a lot of shadowing around that D and that E. I have to keep adding, because as it dries, it softens and it fades. So when it's wet, it looks really strong and really contrasty. But as it dries, then it disappears. So I have to keep adding more, coming back and coming back and coming back again. There I go again. Enough is just a little bit more. Right, almost done. Now, my favorite trick is to put a highlight on the opposite side to the shadow using my white Posca pen. Now, Posca pens are essentially paint in a pen, so it's wonderful if you want to put them down and then blend with it, just like I did with the distress markers. Now I've decided I wanted to make the D pop out even more, and so I'm using my distress ink over the rose. And my thought process was that the distress ink would be resisted by the paint, which is when I took the baby wipe and rubbed it off. But oops, you can see there, bright white blob just underneath my dryer. And that's where one of the dots from my first stamping session came back up. So back to the drawing board, and out come all my distress paints. At this stage I didn't realize that my dear iPad had run out of memory and had cut me off. So here you get the finished picture. I used a die and die cut some leaves, added some color to those, and there you have it, guys.